Hey folks, let's see. Contradiction. Genesis chapter 1 to Genesis chapter 2. Is there a contradiction? If you've been engaged in apologetics in any form, or even if you're just a casual Christian that doesn't really engage in apologetics much, you are likely to have come into the argument by the atheists, the naysayers, the skeptics, that there is a contradiction between chapters 1 and chapters 2. The order of creation is different between the two chapters. Um, Thus, the Bible is not infallible. How can it be the Word of God if there's a contradiction? I mean, there are even some of the skeptics out there that would claim there are two different authors between Genesis 1 and Genesis 2. One person penned Genesis 1. Another person penned Genesis 2. That's why there's two creation accounts. Now, having looked at this, and looking at some of the responses, the answers given by Christians, whether laymen or even, sadly to say, scholars and theologians, I found that the response given to the skeptics is found wanting. It's not good answers. I've heard the response given by laymen and the scholars and theologians that Genesis 1 is dealing with a literal chronology. Whereas Genesis 2 isn't dealing with a literal chronology, but is more focused on the importance of events or the importance of what was created. So since Adam is the apple of God's eye, so to speak, the most important part of God's creation, Genesis 2 puts Adam first. Okay, so they'll argue that it's a different style or genre of literature between the two. One dealing with a literal chronology, the other dealing with the importance or specific focus of God, and that's the reason why you can have differing chronologies, because one isn't concerned or giving us a literal or specific chronology. Of course, that's just not a very good answer. You have others that will argue that in chapter 2, when it says that God had brought the animals to Adam so he can name them, they would argue that in the Hebrew it's actually in the past tense. That is, God had formed the animals and then brought them, meaning they were formed before Adam. Again, that's not the answer, because according to my research, according to the Hebrew, that's actually not possible. The construction of everything in the Hebrew there, that's actually not a plausible answer. But nevertheless, some translations, I think the ESV, I know the NIV, give put it in the had formed, meaning past tense, trying to put the animals before Adam, when in fact there's no need to do that, because that's not the answer to this so-called dilemma or contradiction. So the contradiction, so-called, is this. The naysayer, the skeptic, so forth, will argue that in Genesis 1 you have the vegetation and the animals, specifically the beast of the field, created before Adam and Eve. Whereas in Genesis 2, you have the vegetation and the beasts created after Adam and before Eve. Thus, your contradiction. It's a different order. One has the vegetation and beast before man, and one has the vegetation and beast after man. That's a clear contradiction, they say. Here's the problem with this argument or so-called contradiction, is that people, even the theologians, are completely missing the obvious. Genesis chapter 1, if you read it, you will notice where the attention or focus is at. The word earth is used repeatedly. The vegetation and plants of the earth. The animals, the beast of the earth. When you get to Genesis chapter 2, notice it's not the earth any longer, but rather it's the field. The vegetation, the shrubs of the field. The beast or animals of the field. Why is one discussing the earth and the other is discussing the field? It's because Genesis chapter 1 is dealing with the earth in general, what God created generally or over the earth in general. Genesis chapter 2 is talking about what God created at a specific location referred to as the field. Now, this field found in Genesis chapter 2 verse 5 is called later, a few verses later, a garden. And the Hebrew word for garden means an enclosure. And this garden is called Eden. Okay, so the word field is referencing a specific location on the earth. This field, this specific location on the earth, is a garden. It is an enclosure. It's an enclosed field. And God gives it the name Eden, or the place that it's located is called Eden. Okay? Genesis 1 is dealing with days 1 through 6. Genesis 2 is only dealing with day 6, what happened on day 6. It's giving us a fuller, broader explanation of day 6. Not days 1 through 6, but 6 alone. So what you have in Genesis 1 is the vegetation and the animals being created before Adam and Eve, whereas Genesis 2 is not dealing with the earth, it's dealing with a specific location, a field, an enclosed garden called Eden, and the animals, the vegetation there were created after Adam and in between Adam and Eve. As a matter of fact, if you look up the Hebrew words that are used for the vegetation and the plant life in Genesis 1, and then you compare that with the words that are used in Genesis 2, referring to the plant life and the vegetation, Genesis 2 gives us a different Hebrew word. It is a specific word that is talking about cultivated plants, plants that have to be cultivated. Hence the reason why God didn't put them there until he created Adam first. So it's a different Hebrew word. Likewise, the beast, Genesis 1, and the beast, Genesis 2, are different beasts. In Genesis 1 and 2, both words, Hebrew words for beast, are used. And the word just simply means a living being or creature. Okay? It's even used of Adam. All right? So in Genesis 1, it's talking about the beast in general, living creatures, animals in general. Whereas Genesis 2, in the Garden of Eden, it says that there is a specific type of beast that was created there. And the Hebrew word, some translations will call those beasts livestock, because the Hebrew word used there is specific to domesticated animals. So it's a specific type of animal, just like it was a specific type of plants that were created in the garden. Okay? So in Genesis 1, you have plant life in general, animal life in general, created prior to Adam and Eve on the earth. Genesis chapter 2 is dealing with a specific type of plant and a specific type of animals that were created after Adam in the garden. And this plant life and animal life was created in between Adam and Eve. So God had created Adam on the earth, and then he placed Adam in the garden. All the other animals and vegetation and plants were already created on the earth. Then he created Adam. Then he took Adam, put him into this garden, this field called Eden. Then he created the plant life specifically cultivated plant life so that Adam could tend to it. Then he created specific types of beasts. It's the Hebrew word that basically means domesticated animals. Created them after Adam, after he placed Adam in the garden. Then, when there was no suitable helper for Adam, then after the plant life and the animal life in the garden was created, he created Eve. There is no contradiction because it's talking about different plant life, different animals, and it's talking about a specific location, the garden. There's no contradiction because they're not discussing the same thing. Plain and simple. Genesis 1, animals and plants in general on the earth created before Adam and Eve. Genesis 2, specific animals and plant life created after Adam and before Eve in the field, this specific garden called Eden. The answer to this is very, very simple, yet the majority of people that I find, that I have read, when I've looked up the various answers given by Christians, they completely miss this, and they fail to see the simplicity of this. And one last note to those, and I know there will be many of you watching, to the day-age crowd. Each day is millions and billions of years, or what have you. One of their arguments is that, well, clearly it has to be an age. Each day has to be an age, right? How on earth could Adam have named all the animals in a single day? And of course, again, I find some of the literal 24-hour crowd giving some very stupid answers to this. They say, oh, well, God gave Adam special power, so he was able to do it really fast. No, no. The answer is quite simple. Adam wasn't able to name all the animals on one day because he only had to name the animals that were in the garden, not all the animals on the earth. Very, very simple. It's a literal day, 24-hour period. That's why he could name all the animals in a 24-hour period, because he was just naming the domesticated animals that he was acquainted with in the garden. He wasn't naming the T-Rexes, the Brontosaurus, the bears and lions and tigers, oh my, that were outside of this enclosure. He only had to name, let's say, the cows and the horses and dogs and chickens inside the garden. There's no contradiction. It's simply a failure to recognize and see the difference between the earth and the field. What happened between days 1 and 6 on the earth and what happened on day 6 in the garden. Very simple, folks. Very simple. All right, thanks for watching, guys. Peace.